filmarla una parte. Así de último lo ves en YouTube. ¿Quieres que te traigan la cazuelita con... ¿Qué cosa? La comida sí, un ratitito. Se está calentando. Es una polenta. Uy, está conito. Filmando, ¿no? No te preocupes.
This is Mars. Incredible pictures sent back from Viking, showing a red, rock-strewn landscape under a pink sky. And these pictures would have seemed science fiction not so very many years ago. Let me now show you the very first picture ever received from the Martian surface itself. There we can see the landing pad. It's working, it's sending back information at this moment.
By the morning of the 8th day, the arm had taken its first soil sample. There was a clear trench on the surface, and the biological laboratories returned their analyses. Across 200 million miles of space came the message that was hoped to end 3 centuries of speculation. It came appropriately, not in the language of men or Martians, but in the chatter of a robot talking to a lifeless machine.
Viking did not detect life on Mars. In particular, Viking could detect no organic compounds in the soil.
It's not that easy, unless you're looking at an elephant, to say that something is alive or not. It's not that easy.
The search for life on an alien planet was always looked upon, even by the most passionate advocates, as a long shot. So the fact that the tests that were flown have not yielded confidently positive results, and to most people, I think, including myself, the implications is that the kind of life they were looking for is not there. We did not find alien life forms.
There were no microbes. Nothing could live in Martian soil. Viking's mission was over, and it had taken all our dreams of life on Mars with it.
After a decade of exploration, it seems that the dream of finding life on Mars died.
For the next 20 years, NASA looked elsewhere. There were other planets to explore, and the Space Shuttle program grabbed the headlines.
But here on Earth, the dream endured. There were slightly more realistic expectations.
And then, in 1996, came a remarkable announcement, the possibility that Martian life had been discovered here on Earth.
Today, Block 84001 speaks to us across all those billions of years and millions of miles. If this discovery is confirmed, it will surely be one of the most stunning insights into our universe that science has ever uncovered.
Each summer, a US expedition heads south to hunt for meteorites.
Oh, it's fun, it's beautiful, it's quiet, it's lonely.
In 1984, Robbie Score went to the Allen Hills region of Antarctica to look for meteorites.
When you find a meteorite, it's just really exciting.
Hey, contract. Yeah, another one. Same series.
Okay.
When we ran into the rock, I remember it was bigger than other rocks that we had been collecting. And because of the brightness of the area and the color of the snow and ice and the dark glasses, it had a very green tint to me.
One evening we came across a region that appeared to be a little different from what we had normally seen. And we kept scanning in higher magnification, and we saw something that caught our eye. And we said, what is that? We found this structure. It had 10 to 12 segments in it and appeared to have a head and appeared to have a tail. And we looked at each other and kind of looked with this look and says, this can't be. I went home, and that night I had difficulty sleeping. I was saying, could we have a microfossil here from Mars?
If it can be established that life has arisen on Mars quite independently of Earth, then in my view that would be a discovery more profound than the work of Copernicus and Darwin and Einstein put together. It would truly be the most amazing scientific discovery of all time.
Let's move to today's exciting story, a detective story. The scientists will lay out for you how an ancient rock found its way from Mars and it got to Earth.
The sample which we're reporting on here today is a very unique sample. It is 4.5 billion years old.
We have a number of forms which it is very tempting for us to interpret as Martian microfossils.
I don't agree with Anathatine. I think what we've seen are individual strands of evidence, and they take the individual strands and they plait them together to make a rope, to make a story. And I don't think that we are ready to go that far.
We believe we found the remains of bacteria-like organisms, these wiggly worm-like growths, maybe the remains of organisms which once wiggle around in the Martian ocean.
I must say, I'm highly sceptical, but who knows? And we may know a great deal more after next Friday, when the first Mars probe, Pathfinder, actually gets to Mars.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we have liftoff as an airship begins its journey back to the red planet.
Pathfinder is just the first of a dozen missions that will explore the red planet over the next decade. These missions have been given unexpected importance by the meteorite ALH 84001, which is believed to come from Mars. Pathfinder and the spacecraft that follow it will find out whether NASA is right, whether there really is life on Mars.
Here we have the lander with the rover sitting on one of its pedals. And what happens is that Pathfinder is going to enter the atmosphere, and then some rockets on the back shelf fire. And then before we hit the surface, it gets very exciting. Some great big airbags, twice as tall as this room, pop out, surrounding the lander and protecting it, and bounce as high as a 5-story building and roll and tumble across the Martian landscape. When they finally stop bouncing, then we deflate the airbags, and they're tucked in under the pedals here, as you can see, so that they won't flop over the solar panels.
And then out came the little Sojourner rover and started sending back information about the Martian rocks. At this stage, I'm delighted to welcome back our Mars expert, Dr. Peter Catabell. Welcome back, Peter. Well, what do you think about Pathfinder?
Oh, absolutely amazing. It exceeded most people's wild expectations. It's extremely exciting.
There are two parts of these missions. We mustn't forget the other part. The Sojourner is perhaps to many people the most exciting part, but of course there is the probe itself, which has the panoramic camera.
The first view of the landing site sent back by the cameras on Pathfinder revealed a rock-strewn plain, just like the boulder fields left by catastrophic floods on Earth.
We saw perched rocks that were kind of sitting on a very small little, as if it had been deposited by this flood and actually scoured as water had run past it. So a whole suite of things like that, observational evidence, is very, very strongly argues that this site is exactly what we thought it would be from orbit.
Pathfinder confirmed that the vast Martian channels had been carved by enormous floods. So what does this mean for the chances of finding life?
Yes.
Some of these floods seem to be quite recent. So did Mars remain warm and wet for billions of years? For a planet to support life, there is one vital ingredient it must have. One special substance which any alien, anywhere, will need. The search for life is the search for water. Life involves complex chemical reactions, and as far as we know, complex chemistry needs water.
Liquid water is the absolute key, fundamental, one and only must-have-it requirement for life. No liquid water, no life. It's just as simple as that.
But many scientists just wouldn't accept that rivers had once flowed on Mars. The Viking images still weren't good enough to settle the argument. Then, in 1998, Mars Global Surveyor arrived, equipped with the latest high-resolution electronic cameras.
Peter, various probes are on their way to Mars.
Yes, Patrick, it's an exciting time. It's about 20 years since the last spacecraft, Viking, landed on Mars.
And we have liftoff of NASA's Mars Global Surveyor as America begins its journey back to the Red Planet.
It's going to arrive on September the 11th. It's only an orbiting probe and it's going to do some more mapping for us.
And we're getting superb pictures from MGS, Mars Global Surveyor. Now going around the planet, look at this picture of Martian weather, which is quite amazing. Can you summarize what MGS has told us?
Simple question, Patrick, difficult to answer. The problem being that it's told us so much that Mars is really a completely different world from the one we thought it was a couple of years ago.
Sections of the valleys were revealed in fantastic detail. But these amazing pictures were still no use. These valleys had all been eroded and filled in with sand. It was impossible to say how they'd been formed. Then, after they'd searched through thousands of images, they struck gold. A winding valley, 2 kilometers wide, and at a bend in the canyon, a tiny channel. The unmistakable trace of an ancient river. So Mars must once have been warm and wet, like the Earth. It had rain and flowing rivers. Then, at some point, the atmosphere must have thinned and the planet cooled. The flowing rivers iced over and froze. But when did the rivers stop flowing? Was there time enough for life to emerge before the last traces of liquid water vanished from Mars?
Our whole attitude towards life and a planet is different now than it was back in 1976. We have gone through a revolution in thinking. We're looking at what could be a Mars that had life but doesn't have life anymore.
With the successes of Pathfinder and Global Surveyor, a new age of Martian exploration could begin.
But these successes hit a stark truth. Getting to Mars is hard. Landing on Mars is harder.
Over half of all missions have failed, and for the Russians in particular, Mars has always proved a step too far.
They got close, but the problem is, it doesn't take much to get it wrong.
Despite a string of triumphs at the Moon and Venus, the Russians have been appallingly unlucky at Mars. None of the 14 missions they've sent there has fully succeeded. In the spring of 1971, 2 new Soviet missions thundered off to Mars. Mars 2 and Mars 3 would orbit the planet and attempt a landing on the surface. Viktor Kochonovich was at mission control for the landing of Mars 3.
It was exciting when you get this data, but it was when it started transmitted, and a great disappointment when it stopped transmitted in 40 seconds and we could not do anything else.
The Soviet Union has launched its second unmanned spacecraft in 5 days. It's on a mission to Mars and its tiny moon Phobos.
I'm afraid I've got to begin with some rather unfortunate news. The Russians launched 2 space probes to the neighborhood of the planet Mars. Well, sadly, one of those probes has now ceased to function.
The Great Galactic Ghoul is the monster that lives in the vicinity of Mars and gobbles up spacecraft. Surely you knew that. The Ghoul paroles the perimeter of Mars and has chomped on Russian spacecraft, and now here's the first bite out of a U.S. spacecraft.
Well, it's a mistake many of us have made, but then most of us aren't in charge of missions into space. Scientists at NASA couldn't work out why the Mars orbiter, worth a small £78 million, got lost in space, until someone pointed out that they'd planned everything in feet and inches rather than meters and centimeters.
8 days ago, as it approached the red planet, contact with the craft was lost. This was the moment when NASA scientists realised something had gone horribly wrong.
The American Space Agency, NASA, is on the verge of having to admit to another embarrassing failure. The Mars Polar Lander would be the second spacecraft that it's lost in just 2 months, and there's still no convincing explanation for what might have gone wrong.
3 days on and still no sign of their lost lander. NASA engineers had thought it was just a case of a misdirected communications antenna. Now it looks likely that the spacecraft could be seriously damaged.
No sé lo que les pasó ahí, pobrecitas. ¿Te permiten? ¿Sí? Le dijeron 60 y eran pies, pero anotaron 60 metros. Entonces chocó con todo. Unos pensaron que hablaban en millas y los otros en kilómetros. Me gusta mucho. Oh, no. No sé cuánto pasaron. ¿Sí? Sí, no lo vi.
está?
No, no sé dónde está.
Ah,
Yo lo busqué, pero no estaba. Tuve que usar la. Desenchufé la moladora, ¿no? ¿Cómo se llama esto? La piedra. Para usar ese enchufe.
y ahora ya te enchufada de vuelta. Bueno, gracias.
Primero si se van a poner a hacer una mesita. Vos te divertís mucho, ¿no? Ay, qué estúpido, me olvidé de ponerlo.
Y hace 1000 años estamos encerrados con algo más. Esto es como una telenovela. Así que no veo una novela.
El juez que cuchara es más grande.
¿Qué?
Creo que somos la única pareja que mide qué cuchara tiene más volumen. Me haces un favor, perdón que te joda tanto. Pero no es mi deseo ser horrible. Que la ponga. No deseo que la ponzoñe. Junte. Esperamos que se enfríe. Si no quiero que se me seque la garganta. Mira. Toda escoria le pasó a los rusos y a los yanquis. Mira esta. Chao, gordo.
In our know, there are no Martians, no little green men, there may be primitive life, may be equal to will tell us. What do you think of the chances of success, and what do you really think is going to come out of it compared with previous probes?
Well, there's a sort of about a 50% chance of success with Martian probes. We like to think that we have thought as hard about this problem as we can. And if we don't succeed, it won't be because people haven't tried hard enough. We've tried our utmost.
Well, I think it will succeed. It is a British project. I make many congratulations, Colin. If this works, and I think it will, it'll be the most exciting thing, well, in human history probably, the probed discovery of possible life on another world.
I'll come back and tell you about it, Patrick.
Please do.
It was a long, tense wait through the night. Would Britain's first mission to another planet actually make it? Before dawn, the mastermind of the Beagle 2 project, Colin Pillinger, was on the line to NASA. The hope that one of its spacecraft had picked up the first signal.
I'm afraid it's a bit disappointing, but it's not the end of the world. Please don't go away from here believing that we've lost this spacecraft.
British scientists have again failed to make contact with the Beagle 2 spacecraft. It was their 5th attempt to get in touch.
We may never know what happened. It'll join the many landers that have disappeared on the Martian surface.
For the time being, the mothercraft, Mars Express, will carry on flying over Beagle's landing site. Its powerful cameras will try to spot the lander's parachutes. By contrast, NASA's Spirit rover, ironically carrying less sophisticated scientific equipment, landed safely and is sending back superb images of Mars.
Superb! Viste, les cagaron. Esto es increíble lo que pasó.
Is
Mandaron
Mars
dos
a
naves
world that has
pensando que
fossils?
iban a tardar, no, iban a vivir
NASA has
90
committed
días,
itself to
vivieron
finding
creo
out.
que 10 años.
It has embarked on a series of missions to scour the planet for signs of ancient life. NASA sent rovers that arrived on Mars in 2004, equipped with drills and microscopes to help them search the planet's surface. Stephen Squires is the mission designer.
This is totally different from Viking. The objective in Viking was to test the idea that there are today on Mars microbes living in the soil. That's not what this is about. What we're trying to do is we're trying to study what the environment was like long ago, whether or not there was life there back then that today would be present only in fossil, some kind of remnant form. Suppose we find on Mars evidence that life actually did come into being. There's a chance that the record of that process, the process of life coming into being from non-living material, that record is still there to be read in the Martian geologic record. So it may be that by going to Mars, we can actually understand better where we came from. Rovers were designed to look for clues that would tell us what the environment was like. When we went into this, I never liked taking the attitude we're going there to try to find evidence of water. That's the wrong attitude. That's not science. Well, Mars is what Mars is. I mean, our job was to go there and find out what Mars was like. And if it turned out that Mars had never had water at these two sites, well, so be it. Spirit landed successfully, got off the lander just fine, and everything worked, but we landed on lava. So we came looking for evidence of water, and all we were finding was volcanic rocks. Opportunity, on the other hand, rolled to a stop inside a little tiny 20-meter diameter impact crater. And we opened our eyes and we looked, and the very first thing that we saw 7 meters away in the wall of that crater was this spectacular outcrop of layered bedrock. And within just weeks, we found out that it was largely made of sulfate salts. We found the ripples, evidence for water, all of that. I mean, it just all happened in 6 weeks. It was remarkable.
By 2010, we knew that vast quantities of water had once flowed on the Martian surface. It seems that life really could have existed there.
So the next challenge was to find fossils, or evidence that liquid water was around long enough for life to take hold.
But many dreamt not of ancient Martian life, but of human footprints in the red sand.
But the first problem in realising that dream is simply getting there.
By the year 2020, the first astronauts could be blasting off from Mars. They will be embarking on an epic voyage. But Mars is a very different proposition to the Moon. Lying 56 million kilometers from Earth, Mars is over 140 times farther away. With current technology, a return journey would take around 3 years and require a team of 4 to 8 astronauts. Anyone who thinks this is Apollo with bigger rockets needs to think again. For now, this is NASA's best vision of what a rocket bound for Mars would look like. But if you're going all the way to Mars, a single rocket of this size is not enough. NASA estimates that they will need at least 7 launches to get all the equipment they need up into space. The fuel, the food, the Mars lander, all will need to be launched into Earth's orbit and then assembled in space, much as the space station has been. Only then will it be ready to leave Earth's orbit.
As well as all their experience in space, the Russians have a history of ground-based research into the long-term damage that space does to the body. The best Earth simulation of weightlessness is lying down with your head slightly lower than your body. This volunteer has been in bed for a year. Just as would happen in space, with no stress on his body, he's suffering bone loss and his muscles have been wasting away.
His heart capacity has shrunk. Even short bouts of exercise are now exhausting. Until Dr. Valery Polyakov completed a world record 14-month spaceflight 2 years ago, no one was sure humans could survive the complete return journey to Mars. Far from the protection of the Earth's magnetic field, the crew are exposed to the dangers of space. Solar flares. The full dose of radiation from a solar flare will kill within hours. With only a few minutes warning to clamber into their radiation chamber, the crew might have to spend a week sitting out the cosmic storm. Even so, anyone signing up for Mars will have to accept a heavy dose of radiation.
I think when someone sees planet Earth about the size of Venus, that it's really going to set in that they may never return to that planet.
It's like a voluntary death in a way in which you say goodbye to family and friends and humanity. You say goodbye to the entire thing, even though you are picking up a life, a new life out there.
It is not going to be a sightseeing tour. I think a large part of the journey is just going to be something folks have to get through till they reach their goal.
It's the only planet out there where one can reasonably expect that humans could go and establish themselves permanently for whatever reason. People could go and live on Mars. They can't go and live on Jupiter, but they can go and live on Mars. And I think just because it's available, almost we have the capacity to go there already, that it's inevitable that we will go.
Sooner or later, there'll be a manned colony on Mars. And here you see the domes, which will provide the conditions necessary for life. The Russians think there will also have to be huge water towers, possibly pumping water up from far below the surface. It all looks fascinating, but I wonder what life in a Martian colony is really going to be like.
The Russians know more about survival in space than any other nation. In Siberia, for years they worked in secret on space colonies. At Krasnoyarsk in the Biophysics Research Institute, 3 crew members spent 6 months sealed into BIOS 3. All their water was recycled. Their urine, the humidity from their sweat and breath, were used by humans and plants alike. Normally, it would take acres of open field to support a human being. In BIOS 3, the crew grew wheat, threshed it, and finally baked their own unleavened bread. The carbon in these grains had been eaten and breathed out several times. Now, they were to eat it again.
Раз хлеб свой, поэтому он действительно будет вкусный. Во-первых, это был самый питательный хлеб, калорийный, и съели мы его с удовольствием.
I discovered the source of the terrific power main controls. The power is derived from the strong beam of light, reflected from pure selenium, a new element which gives the light great properties and permits it to be transformed into other forms of energy. Where does the light come from? Where all light and power originate? The sun.
Capturing sunlight from space is no longer science fiction. Last week, the Russians made a first trial orbit of a small mirror to reflect sunlight back to Earth. They hope eventually to orbit much larger mirrors to lighten the Siberian twilight. But warming a whole planet would call for gargantuan engineering. The mirror would need to be about 1/3 the area of Mars itself. Terraforming proponents in the British Interplanetary Society have done some calculations of the kind of mirror required.
Possibly the simplest arrangement for such a mirror is an annulus around Mars at a distance of perhaps 25,000 kilometers and maybe a strip some 300 kilometers wide. The mirror as a whole is in orbit about Mars. The pressure of light from the sun blows the mirror away from Mars, but the planet's gravity pulls it back. These forces balance.
It wouldn't be a rigid structure. Very thin, it would float in orbit. At this stage, this is all purely theoretical.
This is a very simple, crude structure, which, although large, should be quite easy to construct.
So far as putting men on Mars to explore it, like we're doing with the Moon, is that going to be more difficult or easier than in the case of the Moon?
It would clearly be more difficult simply because of the distance and time factors involved. I think the question to ask is it sensible? What are the functions of men in space? Are they simply to go and make footprints and plant flags, or are they to do something useful? In the case of man to Mars, it seems to me that we must exploit the possibilities of unmanned spacecraft there far more than we have so far before we would even think of sending or even having to send a man there. It isn't that we shouldn't because he would be unsafe. It's simply that there's no need to because we can do so much more without man and at so much less expense.
The very first rover to land on Mars was this little thing. This is Sojourner, that landed in the mid-90s. But things have moved on since then, of course. We've got Spirit and Opportunity. Opportunity's still going strong, reaching Endeavour Crater not so long ago. And then come over here. Look at this big beast. This is a full-scale replica of Curiosity, the next rover to land on Mars, and it's going to change everything we know about how to do science on the red planet.
It's so ambitious. It's so audacious. It's so unconventional. We're doing something completely novel, hanging it way out there. You feel exposed.
As chief architect of Curiosity's landing sequence, Adam Steltzner has gone through each part of it over and over in his head. But for now, it only exists in his imagination. And in this NASA animation.
We show up at this near 6 km/s speed. We burn a hole in the sky of Mars for about 100 kilometers long. We are not slowing down very much because there's not enough atmosphere to help us out. So eventually we have to pop a parachute. It takes us down to about 100 meters a second, 200 miles an hour almost. You don't want to hit the surface of Mars like that. So about a couple kilometers from the surface, we take this great leap of faith and cut ourselves free, light our rockets, and start our descent to the surface. Slow ourselves all the way down, and then 20 meters above the surface we do this kind of crazy thing called the sky crane maneuver. The average person on the street thinks it's crazy. Even the team that's working it, sometimes we think it's crazy. The strange part is it's actually the result of reasoned engineering thought.
Say something profound.
I am terribly humbled by this experience. There is a new picture of a new place on Mars. And for me, at least, that's the big payoff.
So, Curiosity's first goal is actually the goal of habitability. Were there conditions on ancient Mars that were suitable for life to have formed in, existed in, and been preserved? These are sedimentary layers, and what these are recording is basically progressive build-up of sediment on the Martian surface.
Okay, so something's depositing regular layers of sediment. Okay, well let's have a look. We can have the next image. There we go. Come in.
It's a big image.
Okay.
The rock is actually a mudstone, very, very fine-grained rock. And we interpret these layers to have actually formed in an ancient lake.
So long-lived is important, right? Because that tells us that not only was there water on Mars, there was water on Mars that persisted for quite some time.
That's right, we've got hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years of sedimentation in a long-lived lake. A big result from Curiosity is that we have these long-lived lakes that provided the conditions that were suitable for life, if it had ever arisen.
Mars, the red planet. A world similar to ours in so many ways, yet also totally alien. A world waiting to be explored. Many scientists believe that the first person to set foot on its surface is alive today. Someone, somewhere, looking up into the night sky and glimpsing the small, rusty planet, may one day make the journey there. They may even discover the first alien life. Perhaps it's someone watching this film. Perhaps it's you.
From the very beginning, our exploration of Mars has been a search for life. But to date, we haven't found anything. So this could be a story of crushing disappointment.
But it isn't, because we have discovered that all the conditions we think life needs to spark into existence were present. And so we just have to keep on looking.
You may never find evidence of life on Mars. But that doesn't matter. Mars isn't just a place. It's a continuing story of exploration, of scientific and technological achievement.
And it's that story that we've tried to bring to your screens. At least, that was Patrick's hope way back in 1967.
We're not trying to keep people abreast of what's happening, though. There is a certain difficulty because you've got to try and hit the right level. If I made these programs too technical, well then people who are not used to astronomy would be simply lost, and that would be no good at all. If, on the other hand, I kept them too elementary, the result would be simply boring. What one's got to try and do is to hit a middle course, so to speak. Whether I succeeded in doing that, I don't know, but at least I've done my best. Good night.
A ver si Julián quiere jugar. Che, esto ya fue.